My name is Maria Elena Castellanos, and I've been a park ranger in Everglades National Park for 15 years. I've wrestled 13-foot Burmese pythons, tracked panthers through sawgrass that cuts like razors, and pulled more tourists out of situations with alligators than I can count. But nothing in my training, not at the University of Florida, not at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, not from the Seminole elders who taught me the old ways, prepared me for what exists in Grid 7 Alpha. If you're watching this from anywhere in South Florida, you've probably driven past it on the Tamiami Trail. That stretch where your radio goes static, where your GPS insists you're somehow in the Gulf of Mexico, where the roadkill seems to decompose in reverse. The Park Service will tell you it's a restricted ecological preservation zone. The Seminoles call it the Breathing Waters, and won't set foot there after their ancestors declared it forbidden ground in 1842. They're both lying. Or rather, they're both telling the version of the truth that keeps people away. It was October 9th, 2024, 5:47 a.m. Hurricane season was winding down, but the air still held that heavy, electric quality that makes the Everglades feel like Earth's largest living organism having a fever dream. I was stationed at Flamingo, the southernmost ranger station in the park, when the call came in from Bobby Gutierrez, one of our contracted python hunters. "Maria, you need to get out here. Grid 7, something's wrong with the water." The connection was bad, crackling with interference that sounded almost like whispers in Spanish. Old Spanish, the kind my grandmother used in her prayers. "Bobby, you're breaking up. What's your exact location?" "I'm at..." Jesus Christ, the GPS says I'm in Cuba, but I can see the observation tower at Shark Valley. "Maria, the water's flowing upward." The line went dead, not disconnected, dead, with that particular silence that makes your teeth ache. I should have called it in, waited for backup. But Bobby had 3 kids and a pregnant wife. He was one of the good ones, a Florida cracker who'd grown up wrestling gators and had transitioned to python hunting when the state started paying by the foot. If he was in trouble in Grid 7 Alpha, every second counted. Grid 7 Alpha doesn't appear on any official trail map. It exists in the bureaucratic shadows, a 50-square-mile section between Shark Valley and Big Cypress that's been restricted since 1962. The official reason changes depending on who's asking. Archaeological site, endangered species breeding ground, unexploded ordnance from military training. The real reason is written in files that require clearance. I technically don't have, but gained access to after the incident with the tour group in 2019. I took my John boat, the one with the modified motor that runs quieter than a whisper, and headed into the maze of mangrove channels that lead to Grid 7 Alpha. The closer I got, the more wrong everything became. The water, which should have been flowing slowly toward the Gulf, was moving in impossible directions. Some currents going east, some west, some appearing to flow straight up before cascading back down like invisible waterfalls. The wildlife was wrong too. I saw a great blue heron flying backwards, its wings moving in reverse but somehow still generating lift. An alligator floated past with its tail where its head should be, alive and apparently unfazed by its rearranged anatomy. And the pythons, the invasive Burmese pythons we'd been fighting for 2 decades, were arranged in perfect spirals on every mangrove branch, their bodies forming geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Bobby's airboat was anchored near what we call Cathedral Grove, a cluster of ancient cypress trees that predate human memory. The boat was running, propellers still spinning, but moving so slowly it looked frozen. Bobby was nowhere to be seen. I tied off my boat and waded into the knee-deep water, my snake stick probing ahead for submerged logs or gators. That's when I noticed the water temperature. It varied by degrees from step to step. Some patches bath-warm, others cold enough to numb my legs, with no visible cause for the variation. "Bobby!" I called out. my voice echoing strangely, returning to me in languages I didn't speak. A response came, but not from Bobby. It was a child's voice speaking Mikaski, the language of the local native peoples. The breathing waters remember. The conquistador's gold was not gold. The fountain was not water. I turned toward the voice and saw a Seminole boy, maybe 10 years old, standing on the water's surface like it was solid ground. He wore traditional clothing from the 1800s, but his eyes were older than the cypress trees. "You shouldn't be here, Ranger Castellanos," he said, switching to perfect English. "The waters are breathing in. Soon they'll exhale, and when they do, time flows backward." "Where's Bobby? The python hunter?" The boy pointed deeper into the grove. He found the plane. The sailors who flew the Iron Birds in 1945, they never left. They're still trying to return to Fort Lauderdale, still thinking they have enough fuel, still young men who don't know the war is over. Flight 19. Every Floridian knows the story. 5 Navy Avenger torpedo bombers that disappeared during a training flight in December 1945, spawning 1,000 Bermuda Triangle theories. But they disappeared over the ocean, not the Everglades. That's impossible. Flight 19 went down at sea. The boy smiled sadly. The sea, the land, the sky. In the breathing waters, they're all the same. Past, present, future, all breathing in the same space. Your friend found them. Now he breathes with them. I pushed deeper into the grove, the water now varying in depth impossibly. Ankle deep one step, chest deep the next. Despite the flat bottom I could feel beneath my boots. Spanish moss hung from the cypress branches, but it was growing as I watched, aging decades in seconds, then returning to fresh green, cycling through its entire life cycle in moments. That's when I saw them. 5 TBM Avenger aircraft, parked in formation on a raised section of marsh that shouldn't exist. They looked factory new, paint bright blue and white, propellers clean of rust. The engines were running, that distinctive radial engine sound that belonged in a World War II movie, not in the modern Everglades. Bobby was standing next to the lead plane, but something was wrong with how he existed. He was flickering between versions of himself, sometimes his current 40-year-old self, sometimes a teenager, sometimes an old man, all superimposed on the same space. "Bobby!" "Don't move." He turned to me, his face cycling through ages. "Maria, how long have I been here?" My watch says 3 minutes, but I've lived. God, I've lived years. I've seen the Calusa building their shell mounds. I've watched Ponce de Leon dying of his wounds. I've seen hurricanes that haven't happened yet. Behind him, the cockpit of the lead Avenger opened. A young man in a Navy flight suit climbed out, his face fresh and unlined, his eyes containing 7 decades of confusion. "Lieutenant Charles Taylor, United States Navy," he said, his voice carrying across the impossible distance between us. "Can you tell me the date? We seem to be having some instrument problems. Compass is spinning, and the water below us keeps changing to land and back. Fort Lauderdale Tower isn't responding." "Lieutenant, the year is 2024. He blinked, processed this, and nodded as if it made perfect sense. "Time storm. We've been flying through a time storm. That's why we can't find Fort Lauderdale. It hasn't been built yet, or it's already gone. Hard to tell in here." "In here?" "The pocket," he said, gesturing around us. "We figured it out about, well, time doesn't mean much, but call it 20 years ago. Or yesterday. The Everglades isn't just a swamp. It's a wound in space-time, bleeding moments from every era. The Native Americans knew. They tried to seal it with their rituals. The Spanish tried to claim it with their crosses and gold. But it just keeps breathing in and out, mixing everything together." Bobby suddenly gasped, his form solidifying into his present self. "Maria, we need to leave. Now." The breathing is about to reverse. The water around us began to bubble, not from heat, but from temporal pressure. The cypress trees started aging rapidly, their trunks thickening, then suddenly returning to saplings, then surging back to ancient giants. The sky above flickered between day, night, and states of light that shouldn't exist. "Into the plane," Lieutenant Taylor shouted. "It's the only stable point." The eye of the temporal hurricane. I grabbed Bobby and we scrambled into the Avenger's cockpit, cramming into a space designed for 3. The moment we were inside, the chaos outside intensified but became muffled, like watching a storm through thick glass. Taylor pulled out a logbook that should have been rotted beyond recognition. Instead, it looked new, its pages covered with entries that spanned decades, all in different handwriting, some in languages that hadn't been invented yet. "We've been keeping records," he explained. "Everyone who gets stuck in the breathing waters. Spanish conquistadors, Seminole warriors, drug runners from the 80s, that real estate developer who wanted to drain this section in 2007. They all find their way to Flight 19 eventually. We're like a lighthouse in the temporal storm." He showed me an entry from 1513. "Juan Ponce de Leon, governor of Puerto Rico. Have found the fountain, but it does not grant youth. It grants all ages simultaneously. The savages were right to fear this place." Another from 1838. "Osceola, war chief. The white men chase us into the breathing waters. They will regret this. Time itself fights on our side here." And one that made my blood run cold, dated tomorrow. "Maria Castellanos, park ranger. Chose to stay. Someone needs to guard the boundary." "That hasn't happened yet," I said. "Hasn't, Will, is happening," Taylor replied. "In here, all times are now. Your future self made that entry to warn your past self, which is now, about a choice you'll make tomorrow." The temporal storm outside reached a crescendo. Through the Avenger's canopy, I could see impossible things. Spanish galleons sailing through the air, Calusa pyramids built from shells and light, hurricanes spinning backwards destroying themselves, the Everglades flooding and draining in seconds-long cycles that represented centuries. And in the center of it all, something vast and alien, neither animal nor plant nor machine, breathing in and out, its respiration causing time to flow and ebb like tides. "What is that thing?" Taylor shook his head. "We don't know. It's been here longer than the continent. Maybe it is the continent, or at least this part of it. The Calusa called it the Dreamer. They fed it sacrifices to keep it sleeping. When they disappeared, it started waking up." Bobby was writing in the logbook, his hand moving without his conscious control. "The pythons know. They came to contain it. Every invasive species is here for a reason. They're antibodies in a system we don't understand." The storm suddenly stopped. The water stilled. The cypress trees froze mid-transformation. Even our breathing seemed to pause. Then the boy appeared again, standing on the Avenger's wing. But now I could see him for what he really was. Not a child, but an echo. A temporal recording of someone who'd died in the Seminole Wars but kept living in the breathing waters. "The exhale comes," he said. "Choose now. Leave and forget, or stay and remember everything." I looked at Bobby, at Taylor, at the impossible reality around us. "What happens if I stay?" "You become like us," Taylor said. "Guardians of the boundary, preventing the breathing waters from expanding. Because if this spreads, if the temporal wound grows, all of Florida becomes unstuck in time. Miami experiencing every hurricane simultaneously. Orlando locked in an eternal loop of development and decay, the keys sinking and rising with each breath. The logbook was still open to tomorrow's entry. My future self's handwriting stared back at me. I had less than a second to decide, because I could feel the exhale beginning, reality preparing to reverse itself, to spit us out or swallow us completely. The exhale hit us like a hurricane in reverse. Everything that had been still suddenly erupted into motion, but backwards. Rain fell upward, lightning struck from ground to sky, and my own thoughts seemed to run in reverse, remembering things that hadn't happened yet. I grabbed Bobby and pulled him from the plane just as reality snapped back like a rubber band. We landed in normal water, normal depth, under a normal Florida morning sky. The Avengers were gone. Lieutenant Taylor was gone. Even the ancient cypress trees looked ordinary, if you didn't know they'd been cycling through centuries just moments before. "Did that really happen?" Bobby asked, checking his python hunting gear like a soldier checking for wounds. I looked at my GPS. We were back at the edge of Grid 7 Alpha, exactly where we'd entered. According to the timestamp, only 3 minutes had passed, but my boots were caked with mud that contained shells from species extinct for 1,000 years, and in my pocket was a page from Taylor's logbook that shouldn't exist. "We need to report this," Bobby said. "Report what? That we found Flight 19? That time flows backwards in parts of the Everglades?" "They already know, Bobby. They've always known." He stared at me. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my satellite phone, the encrypted one that connected directly to the Department of Interior. Speed dial 7, a number I'd been told only to use in catastrophic ecological emergencies. It rang once. "Castellanos, Grid 7, Alpha. We have a witness." The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and completely unsurprised. "Understood. Bring them to Station November. Dr. Walsh will debrief." Station November didn't officially exist. It was a research facility built on stilts deep in the Everglades, accessible only by airboat, staffed by people who didn't appear on any government payroll. I'd been there exactly once before, after the 2019 incident, when a tour group had photographed their own deaths occurring simultaneously with their continuing lives. The ride to Station November took 2 hours through channels that weren't on any map. Bobby sat silent, staring at his hands, which still flickered occasionally between young and old, as if his body couldn't quite decide which timeline it belonged to. Dr. Elizabeth Walsh met us at the dock. She was maybe 60, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that had seen too much temporal impossibility to be surprised by anything. "Mr. Gutierrez," she said to Bobby, "you've been exposed to the breathing waters. We need to ensure you're temporally stable before you can return to linear existence." "Linear existence?" Bobby laughed, but there was hysteria at the edges. "Lady, I watched my own grandchildren get born while they were helping me hunt pythons. I saw my funeral and my wedding happening in the same moment. What the hell is in that water?" Dr. Walsh led us into the facility, past laboratories where scientists studied water samples that aged and renewed in their containers, past holding cells where plants grew backwards into seeds while simultaneously flowering. "The Everglades," she began, "sits on top of what we call a temporal aquifer. Just as regular aquifers hold fresh water beneath the limestone, this one holds time. Raw, unprocessed time that hasn't been organized into proper causality." She showed us to a briefing room where the walls were covered with maps, photos, and equations that seemed to squirm when you looked at them directly. Indigenous peoples have known about this for millennia. The Calusa built their entire civilization around managing it, using shell mounds as temporal anchors to keep the breathing waters contained. When they disappeared, or rather, when they chose to exit linear time, the Spanish encountered the raw phenomenon. She pulled up a scan of a conquistador's journal from 1521. The fountain of youth is real, but it is also the fountain of age, the fountain of never was, the fountain of always will be. We drank, and I watched my men become infants and elders and dust and unborn all at once. Ponce de Leon wasn't looking for eternal youth, I said, understanding flooding through me. He was looking for the temporal aquifer. Precisely. But he didn't understand what he'd found. No one did, until 1945. She showed us classified footage from December 5th, 1945. 5 Avenger torpedo bombers taking off from Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station. Then, impossibly, the same planes appearing on radar in the Everglades, in the Pacific, in the Arctic, all simultaneously. Flight 19 didn't disappear, Dr. Walsh explained. They found a massive temporal vent and were scattered across every possible moment. Lieutenant Taylor has been flying that same mission for 79 years, landing in every timeline where the Everglades exists. But I talked to him, I protested. He was coherent, not insane from decades of loops. Time doesn't drive you insane in Grid 7 Alpha, Walsh said. It makes you sane in ways humans aren't supposed to be. You see all possibilities, all outcomes, all versions of yourself. Taylor has become something like a temporal lighthouse keeper, helping others navigate the breathing waters. Bobby suddenly stood up. The pythons. You said every invasive species is there for a reason. Dr. Walsh nodded gravely. Hurricane Andrew, 1992. Category 5. But it wasn't just wind and rain that hit Florida. The storm surge pushed massive amounts of temporal water up from the aquifer. The entire southern tip of the state experienced a temporal tsunami. Most people forgot. Human minds aren't equipped to remember non-linear events, but the damage was done. Reality became more flexible. She pulled up photos of Burmese pythons, tegus, lionfish, all the invasive species that had mysteriously appeared and thrived in Florida over the past 3 decades. They're not from other countries, I said, the realization hitting me. They're from other timelines. The pythons are from a timeline where reptiles remain dominant. The tegus from one where South America never separated from Africa. Each species is perfectly adapted to consume temporal anomalies, to process paradoxes through their metabolism, their Earth's immune response to the breathing waters spreading. So, we've been killing the things that are protecting us, Bobby asked, horrified. No, you've been maintaining the balance. Too many, and they change our ecosystem beyond recognition. Too few, and the temporal anomalies spread unchecked. It's a delicate balance we've been maintaining without most people knowing. She turned to me. Ranger Castellanos, you've been inside Grid 7 Alpha twice now and remained stable. That's extremely rare. We'd like to offer you a position with Project Pangea. Project Pangea? She pulled up a world map, but not a normal one. This showed temporal hotspots across the globe. The Bermuda Triangle, the Dragon's Triangle near Japan, the Bridgewater Triangle in Massachusetts, dozens of others. The breathing waters aren't unique to the Everglades. They're symptoms of something much larger. The Earth itself is aging, and as it does, the temporal aquifers are becoming active. We're seeing time storms in the Sahara, causality loops in Siberia, and reports of extinct megafauna in the Amazon. Project Pangea monitors and manages these sites. And if we don't? Dr. Walsh showed us a simulation. Florida, flickering between states, sometimes underwater, sometimes a desert, sometimes covered in ice, all simultaneously. Cities existing and not existing. Millions of people phasing in and out of reality. The Calusa had a prophecy, she said. When the breathing waters wake fully, the dreamer beneath will rise. They described it as an entity so vast that it experiences all of Earth's history as a single moment. If it wakes completely, linear time ends. Everything that ever was or will be happens at once. Bobby laughed, but it was brittle. So, we're what? Guards keeping Cthulhu asleep? More like negotiators, Walsh corrected. The indigenous peoples didn't fight the breathing waters. They learned to work with them. The Seminoles still perform rituals that we've proven actually stabilize temporal fields. Their medicine men aren't practicing religion. They're conducting advanced temporal engineering using techniques we're only beginning to understand. An alarm suddenly blared through the facility. Red lights bathed everything in hellish illumination. Temporal surge in Grid 7 Alpha, a technician announced over the intercom. Magnitude 7.3. We have a major breach. Dr. Walsh's face went pale. That's impossible. We haven't had a surge that large since Andrew. She pulled up real-time satellite imagery of the Everglades. Where Grid 7 Alpha should be, there was something else. A massive spiral of water and land and time, rotating like a hurricane, but in dimensions that hurt to perceive. Something's coming through, the technician reported. Something big. Through the satellite feed, we watched as forms began emerging from the spiral. Spanish galleons sailing on dry land, Calusa warriors in canoes paddling through the air, modern airboats phasing in and out of existence. And in the center of it all, something rising from beneath the swamp. Not quite animal, not quite plant, not quite machine. The dreamer, Dr. Walsh whispered. After all these years of small stirrings, it's actually waking up. Why now? I demanded. She pulled up data streams, temperature readings, atmospheric pressure, electromagnetic fields. All of them were going haywire. Climate change, she said simply. The rising temperatures aren't just melting ice caps. They're melting the boundaries between timelines. The breathing waters are expanding because the planet itself is exhaling more strongly. Bobby grabbed my arm. Maria, you said your grandmother practiced Santeria. You said she knew things. I thought of my abuela's warnings, her insistence that I wear her azabache bracelet, her strange songs about water that remembered and land that forgot. She used to say the Orishas came from the breathing waters, that they weren't gods but memories of when time moved differently. Dr. Walsh's eyes lit up. Your grandmother knew. The Afro-Caribbean traditions, brought by enslaved peoples, they contain temporal management techniques. Santeria, Vodou, Obeah, they're all different approaches to negotiating with non-linear time. The alarm grew louder. On the screen, the dreamer continued to rise. It looked like a mountain made of moments, a creature constructed from every second that had ever passed through the Everglades. I could see conquistadors trapped in its skin like scales, hurricanes spinning in its eyes, entire ecosystems growing and dying along its flanks. We need to get to Grid 7 Alpha, I said. If the Seminole and my grandmother's people both knew how to manage this, maybe together we can— Can what? Bobby interrupted. Sing it a lullaby. That thing is the size of Miami. Not stop it, I said, remembering Lieutenant Taylor's words. Navigate it. The Flight 19 crew learned to ride the temporal storms. Maybe we need to learn the same thing on a larger scale. Dr. Walsh was already moving, barking orders. Prep the temporal shielding. Alert the Seminole Council. And someone get me a line to the Pentagon. If the dreamer fully manifests, we're going to need to evacuate everything south of Orlando. As we rushed toward the boats, I felt the page from Taylor's logbook burning in my pocket. I pulled it out. New words were appearing, written in my grandmother's handwriting. Mija, the waters remember everything, every prayer, every song, every story. The dreamer isn't waking to destroy, it's waking to remember. Help it remember right, and time flows forward. Let it remember wrong, and we all become memories ourselves. The boat launched into waters that were already beginning to flow in impossible directions. Ahead, Grid 7 Alpha pulsed like a heart made of centuries. And somewhere in that chaos, Flight 19 was still flying, still trying to get home, still holding the line between then and now. The airboat hit the edge of Grid 7 Alpha like striking a wall of memories. 1 second we were skimming across normal sawgrass prairie, the next we were simultaneously traveling through 1835, 1962, 1992, and 2087. I saw the Everglades burning in the Great Fire of 1989, while simultaneously watching it flood during the hurricane of 2054 that hadn't happened yet. Dr. Walsh had given us temporal stabilizers, devices that looked like diving watches but hummed with frequencies that supposedly kept us anchored to our original timeline. They worked, mostly. I only occasionally flickered into versions of myself that had made different choices. A Maria who became a marine biologist, one who died in Hurricane Andrew, one who was never born because her grandparents never left Cuba. Bobby was handling it worse, his python hunter pragmatism shattered by the impossibility around us. "There!" he shouted, pointing at something that shouldn't exist. "That's my dad's boat." But he sold it in 1987, and he's in it, and he's my age. How is he my age? "All times are now," I said, repeating Lieutenant Taylor's words. "Your father is every age he ever was, all at once." The dreamer loomed ahead of us, a mountain of living time. As we approached, I could see it more clearly. It wasn't a creature in any conventional sense. It was composed of every moment the Everglades had ever experienced, crystallized into something that looked biological, but existed in more dimensions than 3. Spanish conquistadors marched across its surface, still searching for gold, unaware they'd become part of something larger. Seminole warriors paddled through its veins in canoes that moved through arteries of liquid time. Hurricane Andrew raged in its chest, a permanent storm that happened once and forever. At its base, impossibly, sat a modern military installation that flickered between existing and not existing. Quonset huts from the 1940s overlapped with contemporary communications arrays and structures that looked like they'd been designed centuries in the future. Temporal command, Dr. Walsh explained through our earpieces. Established in 1947, 1963, 1985, 2001, and 2019 simultaneously. It exists in multiple times to coordinate responses across all possible timelines. We docked at a pier that aged and renewed with each wave. Military personnel in uniforms from different eras stood at attention, all somehow the same people at different points in their careers. A general, who was simultaneously a young lieutenant, and a retired civilian briefed us without any apparent paradox. "The dreamer has been dormant for 65 million years, he said, his voice carrying the weight of multiple lifetimes of service. Last time it woke, the dinosaurs ended, or began, depending on your temporal perspective. You're saying this thing caused the extinction? No. It is the extinction, and the recovery, and everything in between. The dreamer is Earth's temporal maintenance system. When it sleeps, time moves linearly. When it wakes, it reorganizes causality, usually in response to massive environmental changes." "Like climate change," I said. "Exactly. The planet is heating up, ice caps melting, seas rising. The dreamer senses existential threat and wakes to reshuffle the timeline, looking for a path where Earth survives." Bobby laughed bitterly. "So, it's trying to save us by scrambling time like eggs." "It doesn't understand individual consciousness," the general explained. "To the dreamer, Humanity is just a brief pattern in the larger flow of time. It doesn't distinguish between saving us and erasing us if the result is planetary survival. A new voice joined the conversation, young, old, eternal, which is why you need us. Lieutenant Charles Taylor walked into the command center, but he wasn't alone. The entire crew of Flight 19 was with him, along with dozens of others, people I recognized from missing person reports spanning centuries. We've been preparing for this, Taylor continued. Everyone who gets caught in the breathing waters becomes part of a buffer between linear time and the dreamer's consciousness. We're translators, helping it understand that humans aren't just temporal patterns, but individual experiences that matter. Behind him stood a Calusa chief in full regalia, a Spanish conquistador, a Seminole medicine woman, drug runners from the 1980s, real estate developers from the 2000s, and even what looked like a future version of myself wearing a uniform I didn't recognize. The Seminole were right, the medicine woman said. The breathing waters remember everything. But memory without understanding is just noise. We need to teach the dreamer to remember with purpose. Dr. Walsh pulled up a holographic display showing the dreamer's neural patterns, if you could call them that. They looked like hurricanes made of fractals, storms of consciousness that existed in 12 dimensions. We've been trying to communicate with it using mathematics, physics, linear logic, but that's like trying to explain color to something that sees in gravitational waves. We need a different approach. That's when I remembered my grandmother's songs, the ones she'd taught me as a child, that she'd learned from her grandmother in Cuba, who'd learned them from someone who'd learned them from someone who'd crossed the Atlantic in chains. The Orishas, I said. My grandmother said they were memories of when time moved differently. What if they're not gods but translation protocols? Ways for human consciousness to interface with non-linear time. The Seminole medicine woman's eyes lit up. Yes, our songs, your ceremonies, the Calusa's shell mounds, they're all different operating systems for the same cosmic computer. We need to sync them, Taylor said. Create a harmony that the dreamer can understand. Show it that preserving human consciousness isn't opposed to planetary survival, but essential to it. Suddenly, the entire installation shook. Through the windows, we could see the dreamer's form shifting, growing more agitated. The spiral of temporal chaos at its crown was expanding, pulling in more of the Everglades, more of time itself. It's accelerating, Dr. Walsh reported. At this rate, the temporal distortion will reach Miami in 6 hours, Orlando in 12. Within 48 hours, the entire Southeast will be unstuck in time. Then we don't have time to plan, I said. We need to act now. I pulled out my grandmother's azabache bracelet, the one she'd insisted I wear. In the temporal flux of Grid 7 Alpha, it was glowing, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the dreamer's breathing. This was never just protection, I realized. It was a key, a way to sync with the breathing waters. Bobby pulled out something unexpected, a harmonica his father had given him, that his grandfather had brought from the Georgia mountains. Family heirloom, he said sheepishly. Supposedly played by my Cherokee great-great-grandmother. Always felt different here in the Everglades. The conquistador produced a rosary that hummed with centuries of prayer. The Calusa chief had shells that rang like bells across time. Even the drug runners had something, a Santeria necklace, a Haitian vodou veve, objects that bridged the mundane and the temporal. Everyone who's been touched by the breathing waters carries something, Taylor observed. Some anchor that lets them navigate between linear and non-linear time. The future version of myself stepped forward. I could see her clearly now, scarred, weathered, but with eyes that held compassion for every timeline. You need to go into the dreamer, she said to me. Not physically, temporally. Let it experience human consciousness from the inside. Show it that we're not just patterns, but stories, each one unique and irreplaceable. That's suicide, Bobby protested. No, future me said sadly. It's sacrifice. But not death. Maria will become something else, a bridge between humanity and the dreamer. She'll exist in all time simultaneously, helping translate between linear consciousness and temporal totality. I thought of my daughter at FSU, studying marine biology, planning to follow in my footsteps. I thought of all the tourists I'd saved from alligators, all the pythons I'd removed, all the nights I'd spent protecting this impossible swamp. If I don't do this, what happens to Florida? To my daughter? Future me's expression was answer enough. In her timeline, she'd made a different choice, and Florida didn't exist anymore. Not as a place, but as a temporal anomaly where every moment happened simultaneously, where no human consciousness could survive coherently. I'll need help, I said. I can't translate all of human experience alone. You won't be alone, Taylor said. Everyone who's been caught in the breathing waters will join you. We'll create a chorus of consciousness, showing the dreamer what it means to be human across all times. The dreamer shuddered, and through the windows, we could see it changing. The conquistadors on its surface were looking around in confusion, as if waking from a dream. The hurricanes in its body were slowing, becoming more like breathing than destruction. It was responding to our gathering, sensing the possibility of communication. Dr. Walsh began coordinating the technical side, setting up resonance amplifiers, temporal stabilizers, and equipment I didn't understand. The military personnel cleared a space in the center of the command post. The various temporal refugees formed a circle, each holding their anchor objects. The moment you enter the dreamer's consciousness, future me warned, you'll experience everything, every moment of the Everglades existence, every possible timeline, every choice never made. You'll need to maintain your core self while experiencing infinite selves. How? She smiled, and it was my grandmother's smile. Remember the song, the one about the water that remembers. It's not just a song, it's an algorithm for maintaining identity in non-linear time. I stood in the center of the circle, Bobby on one side, Taylor on the other. The Seminole medicine woman began chanting. The conquistador prayed in Latin. The Calusa chief sang in a language that predated human memory. And I sang my grandmother's song, the one about orishas and ocean crossings and water that never forgets. Our voices shouldn't have harmonized. Different languages, different times, different cultures. But in the breathing waters, harmony isn't about sound. It's about intention, meaning, the deep rhythm of consciousness itself. The dreamer heard us, and for the first time in 65 million years it began to truly listen. Entering the dreamer's consciousness was like diving into an ocean where every drop of water was a different moment in time. I was simultaneously the first algae blooming in primordial seas, a Calusa child building shell mounds, a conquistador dying of fever, an alligator basking in nuclear summer, and 10,000 other existences. But my grandmother's song held me together, a thread of identity in an ocean of possibility. Las aguas recuerdan, el tiempo se dobla, los orillas bailan donde la memoria se encuentra. The dreamer's mind wasn't a mind at all. It was Earth's memory itself, every second of the planet's existence experienced simultaneously. I saw, felt, was the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, the ice ages, the first human footsteps in Florida, the draining of the Everglades for agriculture, the restoration efforts, the hurricanes past and future. And through it all, a vast confusion. Why did these tiny patterns of consciousness resist temporal reorganization? Why did humans insist on linear existence when all times were equally real? I tried to show it, not explain. The dreamer didn't understand language, but demonstrate through experience. I let it feel my first day as a park ranger, the pride and nervousness. My daughter's birth, unique and irreplaceable. My grandmother's death, a specific loss that couldn't be undone by making all time simultaneous. Around me, the others were doing the same. Taylor showed it the terror and duty of his final flight, how those specific 5 hours in 1945 shaped everything he became across all timelines. The Seminole medicine woman shared the Trail of Tears, not as historical event but as individual traumas that demanded witnessing. The conquistador offered his greed, transforming into understanding, a personal redemption that required linear time to have meaning. The dreamer shuddered, not physically but conceptually. For the first time, it began to perceive that consciousness wasn't just a pattern, but a perspective, that each human viewpoint was unique and couldn't be averaged into temporal static. But understanding brought pain. The dreamer felt every extinction it had caused, every consciousness it had scrambled in its attempts to reorganize time. 65 million years of collateral damage crashed into its awareness at once. Its anguish manifested physically. The mountain of living time began to collapse, not destructively, but like something learning to cry. Temporal storms erupted from its form, decades of rain falling in seconds, centuries of drought happening instantly, hurricanes being born and dying in the same moment. It's grieving, I realized, speaking to the others through our connection. It never knew it was causing suffering. Through our bond, I felt future me guiding my actions. She'd been through this before, in a timeline where she'd failed, where the dreamer's grief had turned to rage and erased the entire Southeast from existence. Show it redemption, she urged. Show it that understanding pain can lead to preventing it. I shared my work as a ranger, not the grand moments but the small ones. Relocating an alligator that had wandered too close to humans instead of killing it. Teaching a child why we don't feed wildlife. Removing pythons not with hatred but with respect for their role in the ecosystem. Each small act of balance, of managing the intersection between human and natural worlds. The others joined in. Bobby shared his evolution from hunter to conservationist, how understanding the python's purpose had changed his approach. Dr. Walsh offered her decades of research, showing how knowledge could bridge the gap between fear and coexistence. Even the drug runners shared their stories, people who'd made wrong choices finding redemption in protecting what they'd once exploited. The dreamer began to calm, its form solidifying into something more stable. Not fully physical, not fully temporal, but something in between, a living interface between linear and nonlinear time. And then it spoke, not in words, but in pure meaning transmitted directly into our consciousness. I understand now. Individual moments matter because they cannot be repeated. Linear time gives meaning to choice. Without sequence, there is no growth, no learning, no love that develops over time. Yes, I replied through our connection, but we also need to remember that all times connect. Past informs present, shapes future. That's why you woke up. Earth's future needs adjustment to survive. The warming, the waters rising, the mass extinction beginning. We can work together, I offered. You don't need to scramble time to fix things. Help us see the connections between past and future. Show us the consequences of our choices. be our memory and our prophet. But let us remain ourselves. The dreamer considered this. Through our connection, I could feel it exploring possibilities. Timelines where humanity and temporal consciousness cooperated, where the breathing waters became teachers instead of traps. Acceptable, but requires permanent interface. Someone must bridge between linear and non-linear, translate between human consciousness and temporal totality. I knew what it meant. Future me had warned me. This was the moment of choice she'd faced and failed. "I'll do it," I said. "Maria, no," Bobby protested, but I could feel through our connection that he understood. Someone had to make this sacrifice, and it had to be someone who could navigate both worlds, the scientific and the spiritual, the modern and the ancient. "But not alone," Lieutenant Taylor said suddenly. "We've been preparing for this for 79 years. Flight 19 volunteers to share the burden. We'll create a rotation, each of us taking shifts as the bridge, maintaining our humanity while serving as translators." The Seminole medicine woman stepped forward. "The indigenous peoples have been bridges between worlds for centuries. We'll help maintain the balance." One by one, the others volunteered. The conquistador seeking redemption, the Calusa chief protecting his people's legacy. Even Bobby, gruff python hunter turned temporal philosopher. "A network," Dr. Walsh breathed. "Not one bridge, but hundreds, thousands." Every person touched by the breathing waters becomes a node in a translation matrix between humanity and the dreamer. The dreamer pulsed with something that might have been approval or relief. Acceptable, sustainable, symbiotic. The transformation began immediately. I felt myself expanding, not physically, but conceptually. I could still feel my individual identity, Maria Castellanos, park ranger, daughter, mother, but I could also feel all my other possible selves, all the choices I hadn't made, all the timelines where things went differently. But instead of losing myself in the infinity, the network held me stable. Taylor's steady presence, Bobby's stubborn pragmatism, the medicine woman's ancient wisdom, we were individual notes creating a harmony that the dreamer could understand and humanity could survive. The temporal storms around Grid 7 Alpha began to subside. The dreamer's mountain form settled into something more permanent, still impossible by normal physics, but stable. It looked like a massive cypress tree made of crystallized time, its roots extending deep into the temporal aquifer, its branches reaching into possible futures. The temporal cypress, Dr. Walsh named it, a living monument to the treaty between linear and nonlinear time. Through my expanded consciousness, I could see the effects rippling outward. The invasive species, the pythons, tegus, lionfish, began behaving differently, no longer just consuming temporal anomalies but actively maintaining the balance between timelines. They were Earth's antibodies evolving into Earth's translators. In Miami, people reported strange dreams where they saw the consequences of their choices rippling through time. In Orlando, theme parks discovered that their attractions sometimes showed visitors glimpses of genuine magic, temporal echoes of futures where imagination and reality merged. The Keys experienced tides that occasionally brought in objects from timelines where sea levels never rose, inspiring new approaches to climate adaptation. But most importantly, the Everglades itself changed. Grid 7 Alpha was no longer restricted. It became the temporal preserve, where carefully supervised groups could experience non-linear time, where scientists studied causality, where indigenous peoples performed ceremonies that actively shaped tomorrow by honoring yesterday. I still work as a park ranger technically. My body exists in linear time, doing normal ranger things, rescuing tourists, managing wildlife, filling out paperwork. But part of my consciousness is always connected to the dreamer, translating between its vast awareness and human understanding. Sometimes I see through its eyes all of Earth's history as a single moment, beautiful and terrible and infinitely complex. I see the paths humanity might take, the futures we're creating or preventing with each choice. Most lead to extinction, but some, growing more numerous as awareness spreads, lead to something unprecedented, a species that learns to think in deep time while living in the moment. Bobby still hunts pythons, but now he knows he's really managing temporal interfaces. He's gotten good at it, able to sense when a snake is from our timeline or another. He keeps the balance, making sure no single timeline dominates. Dr. Walsh runs the research station, which has become public, though most people think it's just studying climate change impacts on the Everglades. They're not wrong, but they don't realize she's studying climate change across all possible timelines, looking for the choices that lead to survival. Lieutenant Taylor and Flight 19 still fly their eternal patrol, but now with purpose. They map the temporal currents, identify dangerous convergences, and guide lost souls through the breathing waters. They've saved hundreds of people from temporal displacement, teaching them to navigate between times without losing themselves. The Seminole and Miccosukee tribes have revealed their true role as temporal engineers, their ceremonies no longer hidden but celebrated as essential maintenance for reality itself. Other indigenous groups worldwide are coming forward, admitting they too have been managing temporal rifts for millennia. And my grandmother's songs have become part of standard training for anyone working in temporal zones. The orishas she sang about were real, not gods, but interface protocols, ways for human consciousness to safely interact with forces beyond linear comprehension. But perhaps the most important change is in how we see the Everglades itself. It's no longer just a swamp to be preserved or exploited. It's Earth's memory, breathing in and out, keeping time flowing while remembering everything that ever was or might be. Every morning, I stand at the edge of Grid 7 Alpha, now marked with proper signs in multiple languages and timelines, and watch the sunrise. But I also see all the sunrises that ever were, all the ones that will be, and all the ones that might have been. The breathing waters remember everything. And now, finally, they understand what they're remembering. My name is Maria Elena Castellanos. I'm a park ranger in Everglades National Park, where time flows in all directions, where Flight 19 lands every day and never, where the future is shaped by honoring the past. I guard the boundary between then and now, helping humanity and the dreamer learn to coexist. If you ever visit the Everglades and you see water flowing upward or pythons arranged in impossible patterns, don't be afraid. You're witnessing Earth's temporal immune system at work, maintaining the balance that keeps our timeline stable while allowing for the changes necessary for survival. Just remember to stay on the marked trails. The breathing waters are safe now, but only if you respect them. Time is like any force of nature, beautiful, powerful, and absolutely unforgiving if you forget that you're just a small pattern in an infinite tapestry. But even small patterns matter. The dreamer taught me that. Every individual consciousness, every unique perspective, every unrepeatable moment, they all contribute to the story Earth is telling itself. And that story, despite everything, continues, one breath at a time, one moment flowing into the next. Forever and never and always and now,